Hey Sean,
Hey Carson, it looks like you
you
got your
sound
setup
so
going.
you sound so sad. Hey Carson, you're like, oh God,
Oh,
look at all these marks we've got to do.
hey Carson.
All right, so how are you gonna approach? I'm curious. Um, tool.
Well,
I'm gonna start with the brush.
yeah, I think I'm gonna try to get the studio um, aspect to it. So I'm going to pretend that I'm Mizuki first, and I'm going to ink all the figures, and I'm going to look at what it looks like with just the figures in.
That was my thought too, and to me, it looks like the figures are done with the brush.
You might be right. He has got a wild line, but I think they're probably pen. And I'm going to see if I can do the entire image with a single pen, which
Okay,
you can probably guess which one it is.
you got your 100.
I do. The Hunts 100, the new old stock Hunts 100, which I believe is going to be flexible enough on a single one to take care of all the finest lines, all these thick contour lines here, which I'm trying to imagine he drew through some of this here. I should note, um, because we always talk about the handedness of the different cartoonists when we're copying their stuff. Um, Mizuki was definitely right-handed. Do you know how I know?
You're having a hard time with some kind of taper.
No, because he doesn't have a left hand.
Oh,
He lost his left arm in an air raid, and contrary to what you might read on Wikipedia, um, I just edited the Wikipedia right before we started talking, so it's possible someone edited it back. Um, Contrary to what you might read on Wikipedia, he was a righty, like virtually every Japanese person before World War II, because lefties. I mean, it was not an acceptable thing socially.
they got trained out of it.
That's right.
My
Um,
dad was actually trained out of being a lefty as a child here in the States.
yeah, still
His dad, I wonder, his dad was in the Air Force and
interesting.
he like beat it out of him. So my grandpa, not actually beat it, but
Yeah,
you know, like would not let my dad use his left hand. So my dad's a slightly ambidextrous because of it.
right.
Not totally, but slightly because he didn't use it enough to keep it.
Uh, we talk about me being a lefty, but I'm actually what's called cross dominant, in that I use different hands for totally different tasks.
Interesting. So what do you use your right hand?
Throwing, carrying,
Throwing.
mm-hmm, arm wrestling. I mean, any strength task is my right hand, and any
Interesting.
finesse task is a left-handed task for me. Although with a tool like heavy charcoal or something like that, I can draw just as well with my right hand.
But with a fine tool, you can't.
No, I don't have the fine control with my right hand.
Interesting. I wonder if like that's something because you do have like the precedent for using your right hand, you could probably train that up pretty easily with a little bit of focus.
Yeah, it's possible, but I've got a limited amount of time.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
it, like if you lose your left arm, you're better off than most of us.
right.
I think about that constantly. I've tried at different points in my life to draw with different limbs just because I out of fear. Like I've tried drawing left-handed because really like once you understand how to draw, you know what you're looking for. So I can like do a decent, it's just shaky.
I've got an annoying tech question for you, Carson.
Yeah.
Are you screen sharing your video right now? And if so, is it going to mean that mine is a postage stamp size the whole time?
Uh no, that's a good question. I'll have to edit mine in because
Because
I'm
right.
trying something. Yeah, I didn't think about that. We're on the gallery view, so yours will be full size.
Okay.
I will have to figure out how to edit my. So for people listening, we're trying something new where I have not liked for a channel that's all about image quality. I've not been liking the image quality that my very expensive webcam has been producing.
Right.
So I'm trying a camcorder, and also you'll notice in the book review video that we did, hopefully I'll have a DSLR of the shot of the book, and we're trying out some different cameras. So yeah, I'll have to figure out how to shrink down my footage into the half of the box.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that's the plan. But we're
So,
definitely shooting in gallery mode.
what fun figures these are.
Oh yeah, they're so much fun. And with the brush, I don't know how you're feeling with the pen, but with the brush, it feels really good. I'm shaky, so the lines aren't as controlled as I would like them to be. But you know, I hadn't done any other work today, so
You
my
think
hand's
that
a little shaky.
you'll be able to ink as smoothly as these figures are inked when you're 73 or 74 years old?
I hope so. He doesn't have much shake, does he?
No.
Like you look at a lot of artists and their lines get pretty peanuts looking
Mm-hmm.
in their old age. They have that characteristic wobble. Dave's getting that now.
Right. Well, his injury is pretty sure is the main contributor to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm getting there. I'm gonna have to. I'm assuming if I ever try and do another full project with all of that kind of detail, I'm gonna have some kind of surgery.
Oh man.
Um, I'm assuming it's an ulnar nerve issue, an ulnar nerve entrapment. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's going on with Dave either. I know he won't go get it looked at, but
Yeah.
what he's describing is similar to the pain that I've been experiencing since doing Strange Death. So
Oh man.
uh, it comes from the tight control of the brush mostly, but is a bit to do with cross hatching.
So we've talked about speed before. Seems like most of the Mizuki strokes are a medium speed. They're not slow. The ones that I assume are his strokes versus an assistant's, you know, marks. They're not slow, but they're not rapid either.
Yeah, I think we're both going at about the same speed. Um, I don't know with the brush. Probably having to go a little bit slower. Plus, you're just faster than I am. But yeah, they're pretty controlled. It feels like to me. They're not like totally wild. They seem very thoughtful.
They're talking about how what these would have looked like in pencil, and I would bet you vast amounts of money that his pencils for the figures were very, very loose and suggestive.
Oh yeah, and I've been watching that Naoki Urasawa thing that I sent you last night,
Mm-hmm.
the man bin that
Yeah, it's
I've been
fantastic.
obsessed. Have you seen that before?
No, I'd never seen that before. I just
So
I just got to watch the
anyone
first 10
else?
minutes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just got to watch the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's amazing, and they're working on the fifth season now. So it's Naoki Urasawa, 20th Century Boys, a very
Mm-hmm.
well regarded, famous mangaka in his own right, and he's going around and recording other famous mangaka in their studio
For
working, and
posterity.
then they sit down afterwards and watch footage. So it'd be like if we didn't say anything here and then sat down and reviewed the video afterwards
Right.
together. um, Man, is it cool and informative, and holy crap, do a lot of those people draw really fast
Yeah.
and loose. Like you said, the pencils are very loose,
Just the
and
barest
then
suggestion.
yeah, they ink so fast. I mean, I get it. You're putting out what, a full book every week?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think some of them were like they penciled the page in 10 minutes. What? And then they're like, an hour later, the page is done. By which they mean they drew the figures and handed it off to their assistants.
And balloons, generally.
Yeah, the balloons. Yeah.
Basically, everything that is indicated by the style is distinctive to the hand of the primary person.
Yeah. I'm assuming that's kind of what he does here too. And you'll get a sense of like, okay, if he was drawing this page,
right,
he would be done at about this point in time because
yeah,
we're both getting to that point.
that's right.
So that's like one page down. I mean, there's all the planning phases and stuff, but when you're thinking about that manga, it's the poor background artists. So I'm thinking, God, like they got to do this whole crazy image and still be on time. Like he's just over there doing the fun job of banging
Yeah,
out these nice rubbery characters.
it's interesting, and the economics are not really right for it in the United States currently, anyway. Um, but you know, if you think about it, like let's go back to our video with oh my gosh, his name is slipping my brain now as I'm drawing. The swamp, Tsuge.
So yeah.
Uh, Tsuge, who worked as an assistant for Mizuki in the early '60s. I mean, Tsuge didn't have any money. He wanted to draw comics. His economics, you know, he was faltering, and Mizuki, he was a peer of his, was having a lot of success taking the techniques that they had all sort of developed together and bringing it to a children's comic market. And so he hired all of the pals or people that he admired and brought them on board. And
That's very considerate of him.
um, you know, so it's an interesting thing. I mean, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon.
I'm
And
curious if there's a risk, though, at least in the manga market as it currently stands, if there's a risk of getting stuck as an assistant, or
yeah,
if there's like a mechanism in place where it's like once you're an assistant for such and such a years, then you kind of get a chance to do your own book. Like, is it that just doesn't seem prudent because then you're constantly having to train up a new artist. You'd think you'd almost want to keep them trapped
yeah.
a little bit. But is it more like a Renaissance apprenticeship where the goal is to turn them into their own master at some point?
Well,
I'm just curious about that.
yeah. I mean, I think that there are people who end up being specialists who are probably fairly highly paid and you know can do a certain kind of thing, or you know don't have maybe their own ambitions or don't have the figure drawing skills for the to be the lead guy.
Yeah, like I think I would be pretty okay. Like, not that I really don't like drawing buildings and stuff, but like given like working with Dave, one of the things that brought me back to comics basically was here's some photos, go copy it.
Right.
Like I like that. I don't, I have like I keep kind of hinting at I have one story I want to tell basically. I
Right.
don't have a slew of stories I want to tell. So I could see that there would be a bunch of people in that same situation that don't have the desire, or they're not writers. Like a lot of these guys
Right.
have to be their own writers and stuff. So that makes sense. But I just wonder if there is built into that system some kind of out for the people who like have their own ideas.
Well, you get to know the editors that you're that work at the magazines. You know, you're pitching stuff to the editors. Maybe you're having lunches with them, developing things on the side. Um, I think that it probably really depends. It's a fairly
Yeah, and
individual
then
thing.
but is there like oh, you've been talking to my editor on the side and now I'm gonna lose you in my studio. I don't know. It just seems like a ripe for trouble,
Mm-hmm.
or at least given our American value system. I could
Right.
see that going wrong. It could be entirely different where that's just not as big of a deal for them.
So so I'm past the part that I think that Mizuki personally did, as you are, and I want to note these big thick lines on the rocks, which if the value of the rocks weren't so dark, these would just be devastating to the main image.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm working on now. I still have some textural stuff to do on the figures, but those look like they're done with a different tool. So,
Right.
and I wonder because this does look like big brushy work to me. Like I doubt he's the one that did this, but um,
No, I think we're probably past that point now.
yeah,
But yeah, the if this was if these had this thick of a contour line
it
and
looks like it.
but then didn't have the darker values on top, I think this would be a big imbalance to the image. Specifically the thick contour lines being so close to the figures.
Oh
Um,
yeah, this would override the whole thing. But they know what they're doing. They're
yeah,
setting up, and I think in this case you're right that this was not stippled first.
right.
And then this brush put over it. Like that just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm having this is going to be a case where I should probably pull up the actual image. I don't know. I don't really care. This is a case where in the print it's hard to tell. Like it's hard to be recreating this like dot for dot.
Right.
Um, so
Carson's
I'm doing what I think is in there, which you're doing as well. These big thick strokes.
this is a in terms of my sort of personal target style. This is pretty close to where I would like to land. Maybe the figures are more uh, cartoony, but this is pretty close to where personally I would like to land in terms of my comic work. In terms of the color, uh, I got really addicted to this kind of black and white color when I first read Cerebus. No surprise. Um, Specifically, the Jocka story portion of the book, and
Well, Dave talked about that, right? That they were coloring with the, or Gerhard, one of them talked about coloring with the black, I think, right?
hmm,
Is that not, or
I don't recall. Um,
I thought I've heard that before in reference. Maybe it's just someone talking about Cerebus.
but the that particular era of the book was heavily inventive in terms of texture, and definitely had the sort of separation that we're talking about, where the backgrounds would be rendered in a different type of stroke and a different type of method and everything than the foreground figures, and they were made to work in a very animated style. Um,
Yeah.
I think in the
And the
afterword,
animation versus the realism too.
right?
That works really well.
I think in the afterword that I wrote for the restored one, I talked about it in relationship to Don Bluth films, um, but I had never really made the connection that the manga that I enjoy is also benefiting or influenced by that same association. So I'm getting a little ridiculous here. I told you I was going to do it all with one tool, and now I'm in these solid areas of black. I mean, that's just ridiculous of me to do it, so I'm not going to do that. I'll
Nah,
go.
pick up, use the 14-year-old Carson technique. Scrub up some paper into the tip of that bad boy and just use it like a Q-tip. That's it's a technique. I want one other pro at some point to be like, yo, yeah, I still do that. Just to validate 14-year-old me. It was actually working really well on that Barry Windsor Smith. So
Mm-hmm.
um, okay, I've pretty much got as much as I think could feasibly have been maybe understood as being done with brush. Well, there's some pretty big thick strokes up here. I'm just gonna fit. There's definitely a lot of this that looks like all black is actually created with stippling, because every now and then you get this like rare little white moment where you're like, holy crap, they actually they did stipple that whole area. Insane people. But I think I'm gonna switch over to the 102 for a little bit of it. I know this is insane. And then I'm going to switch over to the Gillette 404, which is the thicker pen. Because I keep making this mistake of um, undershooting the thickness of the lines.
Right.
And I think that has to do with me using the 102 and I'm not pushing hard enough. But I do see a switch over down here underneath their feet. Where there's thicker lines and thinner lines. And so I want to do that. I'm also going to do you've already done the texture, the patterning on there. Whoa. Okay. That 404 is a little sloppy. Oops. Oh, that's a thicker line than I thought. Okay. Maybe not on the 404. Do you think this was a tone on his
The dot for that top layer, yeah, I do. Trying to.
also this pattern on his?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't think so. It seems to have a little bend to it, but it was easy enough to just doodle it on there.
Yeah, okay. I tried using this other pen. It's way too thick. So
Okay.
there's going to be part of my image that looks really terrible. I tried the wrong tool. But now I'm using one that's too thin. Ooh, I need that 100 that you got.
Pretty
The other
sweet.
problem with the 102 is it's not rolling around the corners.
Yeah, so far I have not been let down by my 100. This is the same one that I've used for all of the video recreations we've done so far.
Okay, another thing I'm going to do is definitely for the stippling, I'm going to a tech pen.
Okay.
I don't think that was a... I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll try the stippling with I mean, I tried it on a jacket. I wasn't particularly happy with it, but I'll try the stippling on with the same tool. Right now, I'm having fun putting down the ground marks, which seem fairly spontaneous to me.
Yeah, I'm really having trouble here with this. Okay, there we go. Tech pen's working better for me. I need that 100. I think I have a 100 somewhere. I have a whole bunch of nibs. I gotta dig through them.
I'm trying to build the ground hatching in the same way that I'm perceiving them building it, which was, I say them because I don't know how many people are involved with this image. Um, I'm building out from the tree, which I'm presuming that the texture, because it's darker near the tree, started as essentially a shadow while still describing some of the ground texture. It's got a nice like planar quality to it where it moves in a patchy sort of sense that indicates the ground changes, but it also gives the shifting surface of the ground.
Yeah, it runs like horizontal along it kind of, but with a little bit of warp to show the ground coming up.
Right. And then some small patches of warping to different directions that sort of give it a divot in the ground feel to it. And then some patches where you have white in there, which is the slight bit of dappled light.
I'm gonna show so I pulled out the Gillette 404, and the first thing it did was made this big blob on my paper here. So I've got a big blob of ink. I'm gonna take a tissue paper and roll it up and stick it right in the middle of that big blob, and it's gonna soak up. I don't know. Again, this is one of these 14-year-old Carson solutions that I've
Right.
kept. I don't know if other people do this to get...
No, it's a good one because then you don't have it pool and it doesn't interfere with your ability to draw over that area at a later date.
Yeah, and you don't want to just squish it down. I mean, it is still very wet, but I'm getting some of the ink off of there, so yeah, it will hopefully dry up a little bit better. Because that did not go well for me using that pen. Okay, I still gotta put. I went ahead and hand stippled the dots upstairs. This is definitely a tone on his pants, but the ones up look. I don't know, they were more uneven to me, so I went ahead and hand stippled those. But maybe I'm just crazy.
I've pulled out
And
the brush and I'm doing the blacks on the rock. And I'm imagining that this person is looking at a photographic reference of this area
yeah, I'm assuming this is a real rock.
and
It
is sort
feels
of,
very real to me.
right, and is sort of working, if you think about a labor intensive technique like stippling, what you're trying to avoid is having to stipple in an area that you then nuke with black afterwards.
That's what I was
Um,
saying though, is there's enough like little bits of white showing through here and there that I think a lot of the areas that read as black were stippled into
well, I hope not.
very heavily.
I wonder if it was just dry brush or something that's then worked
It
over.
looks we'd have to pull that image back up on screen and look at it real close, but it looks kind of to me it looks a little insane.
Could also
Like the
could also be worked back into after the fact with the eraser or a exacto knife.
I hope so. Or like some white ink.
Right.
I hope so for their sake. I wonder, you were talking about the division of labor in the image. Like, is it one person doing the background? Um, I wonder if there's within the studio, there's like the guy that just loves stippling, and there's the guy that loves cross hatching, and they divide it up like that.
Right. It's
Because
possible.
I have found as an educator that some people really like stippling and some people really like cross hatching. I myself much prefer cross hatching and I find that soothing, but stippling drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And it seems to be not 100%, but it seems to be the case that people veer one way or the other in their preference.
Hmm.
And so I wonder if there's like the one guy in the studio that's just like, yes, like let me put on some relaxing music and I will
Right.
stipple all day. And the other guy's like, no way, man, let me do the trees, the leaf textures. It's interesting to me that it doesn't look like in all of these ticky marks there's as much taper as my hand creates.
Right.
They seem like a more even pressure. So again, I wonder. We got to get a hold of the G pins, the Z pins, and
Sure.
there's another one that I never heard of that they were talking about on the episode of the Manbin I was watching that looked more like your Hunt 100 with, well, no, it was an even longer nib. It looked more like a thin nib pin though that didn't have the rounded,
Right.
the writing pin like the school pin like you're talking about.
Well, this
So
one technically
we need
has
to get
a
some of those.
rounded edge. It's just microscopic rounded edge.
Okay,
Um,
the 100 does.
that 100 does, yeah. But I mean, it's so small that it's functionally, you know, you can make very fine lines with it. But you can do back strokes carefully. I don't really,
Carefully.
yeah, I don't really do it that much. And I'll sort of warm up to a backstroke. Like when I say backstroke, I mean like imagine yourself doing like a saw motion where you're going to the left and to the right and the left and the right. If you do that
Or
right,
even wrapping around a corner on like a circular object.
right,
Be very hard with the 102.
yeah,
The pen will flick. It will catch and flick or it'll tear up the
right.
paper.
If you're using a smooth surface and you have a rounded nib, then you can get those saw type of motions, the back and forth, the backstroke motion, and not have an issue.
Are you being tempted to turn the paper at all on these marks, or
Uh,
it looks like you're keeping it pretty straight?
I'm keeping it straight for the whole thing because there's not a lot of taper. I'm probably doing them a different direction than they were actually done. But the only place I should have turned is the hatching on the left guy's pants, and instead of turning, I fucked it up.
I'm gonna
I
try
thought,
and do it.
oh, I can do it backwards. I can do it from the fine point to the thick point, going downward and slightly to the right, and I couldn't. So
I'm
that's
gonna
like,
try and do it without the turn. It's such an awkward angle for me to draw a cross like that.
oh, the ones that are falling over to the left on the left side of the page.
Just any of the ones that are headed. I tend to be more comfortable drawing uh, like at this angle rather than straight across my body, like
Okay.
pivoting on my elbow rather than pulling my shoulder. I don't know. I have to, like these marks here, if I'm going to keep the page straight, I have to actually, you'll see my hand is now hooked up over the top of the image. I think
Okay.
that's something a lot of artists don't do. They don't reposition their arm much. So this is like what I would have to do to get those marks. But for me, it's much easier to just turn the whole thing almost vertical. And then I can just make these short little ticky marks. But I am getting more taper than they are. Than they did, I should say. Try and stop that. It's really interesting to have to fight your own habits doing these
Mm-hmm.
videos.
Yeah, it's funny if you were to watch either Carson or I make an image that is native to us, we would seem a lot less hesitant than we probably do sometimes. Here, if I had a video of me painting, like the big portrait that I finished up on Friday, you know, you just see me doing stuff.
Yeah, really nice watercolor portrait.
Thanks. Um, because it's my tools and my painting, and I'm choosing the way I'm doing it. And this, you're trying to inhabit some other kind of process. Hopefully for a worthwhile goal, but it slows you down.
Well, I'm pretty OCD, so it's like these marks are on the ground are individual enough. They're not so pushed together that I can't see them individually. So I'm gonna get each mark like exact. I'm gonna check off each one, and I'm going to get them the same length and try and get them with the same thickness because I'm just OCD. When they were doing it, they're just chop, 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 chop,
Right.
chop. When it gets to the thicker areas, it's a little bit harder to do that because you lose sight of where the individual lines are, and you got to fall back into your. Well, it's harder not to fall back into your own habits.
Right. Your native processing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot on like the area I'm working on now that has the cross hatching. Once I put in one direction, it's very hard to see the other direction. And that's one of the places that I've been undershooting the line weight on a lot of the videos.
Yeah.
And when I compare it to the original one, then my temptation in a few of the videos now has been to go back in and put in a third layer of hatching. And then when we
Right.
put them up on the comparison, I'm like, oh God, why did I do that? It looks so ugly. And that's because of the native pressure that I tend to draw and that I tend to make my lines with. So I'm trying to make a little bit more effort on this one to be conscious of that because there's something for me to learn from that
Right.
that I'll then be able to transport into my own art.
When you desire
A
to.
a muscle memory thing about, oh, you should press. And I think, Sean, this is one of the reasons you like that 100 better is it actually hurts a little bit given what's wrong with my hand or whatever to push as hard with
Oh
the
yeah.
102 as I need to get the thickness that I'm seeing here. It's like,
I don't want to have any pressure. I mean, my goal is to just have the tool not feel like anything. I mean, I just want to have it be an extension of my fingers. Um, Especially as you get older and you start, you know, start playing games like what is this ache?
Yeah. When did that kick in for you? What age?
39 or 40. I had all types of hand problems last year that were neurological issues. But everything seemed to happen at the same time. I've gotten ingrown nails in my hands and feet 3 times in the past year. I'd never had a single one before.
Mm.
They're not like visible. It's not like you can look at my hand and be like, oh, that's an ingrown nail. It's like, oh, I have shooting pain all through my hand right now. What is the deal? And it's like, oh, it comes from this part of my nail. Oh, I trim this part of my nail. Oh, that feels a little better. you know,
That's an odd one.
there's all types of things. I think that you just get older and there's opportunities for falling apart.
Yeah, sucks.
So
We're turning
hopefully,
40 here pretty soon.
hopefully, keep your habits good and try to minimize that. But
Well, the thing that sucks is when you're young, you don't think about it, so you don't develop good habits. You don't
right.
start thinking about the good habits until the like right now I'm slouching, and I got to sit up, but it's just years and years of doing the same type of stuff.
So these trees back here, this is so much in my wheelhouse. It's not even funny. I must have copied images like this before. Or I used to do texture demonstrations for my kids when I was teaching high school, and I'd just do a bunch of textures right off the top. Um, there's probably some common source that I've copied, but this just feels very, very familiar to me. Like using these slightly tilted lines to build up.
And the triangles,
Uh huh.
like these kind of triangular ticky marks.
And then going back in with some single spaced hatching to basically put areas of shadow incorporated with the texture of the tree.
Yeah, this feels comfortable to me too. Although I tend to, when I do foliage, I tend to do the loop de loop a little bit more. These are all like single strokes put next to each other.
Right.
I tend to do that buzz saw like this type
Yeah,
of thing.
me too. There's a little bit in there, but yeah, you're right. And it's mostly single strokes that are sort of accomplishing the same goal. But yeah, I get the buzzsaw thing too.
It's a little furrier looking this way.
I think I got that from Loomis, the Loomis rendering and pen and ink book.
I'm trying to think where I know. I'm sure at some point I was like looking at how Chris Ware draws trees, like when he's doing that potato head guy, when
Mm-hmm.
he's doing his more render stuff. Moebius, I'm sure he has that butterfly mark that he makes. That's this back and forth. Oh, this pen's loosening it up enough now that I can actually go back and forth with it.
And then notice the hatching lines here that's making essentially the value of the bushes are all up and down lines. We talked about this before, but that pushes it firmly into the background. It acts like a veil.
Flattens it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then
There's
some
really
real nice textures on the trees.
mm-hmm. there's no mark misplaced in this image.
No, they're so thoughtful. Every texture. And the textures have a rhythm and a balance to them too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like, oh man, this guy's so good at texture, but that's part of that painterly thing is so attentive to the rhythm of the values on the page. Um, and it's allowing them to get similar values right next to each other too, but still
Right.
be differentiated. It's really an amazing thing once you get control of that to be able to have two of the exact same gray right next to each other, but be totally differentiated just because of the type or the direction of the mark. It's really powerful. Because
So
if you're just in Photoshop filling in with the gray, it's gray.
right.
It's you get 50% gray in a paint bucket and you drop it in there. Um, I do kind of wish, like, I was looking at some of the Walking Dead books that I got the other day, and it's like, man, this book
Mm,
would have been so much cooler if they wouldn't have done that damn computer generated
right.
gray and would have taken the time. I mean, I still love that book, but
Washes or texture, yeah.
or if they would have just done that thing that I was trying to do, where they took all those grays and converted them to a dot tone,
Sure.
because what we've been talking about with the printing is as soon as you have something like that, you can't print it just line work anymore. You're printing using another method, and so the line work gets fuzzy. And um, I think the Japanese are very smart for realizing, hey, look, we're doing black and white work. We have to keep it all marks. It has to be solid black marks because then we can rely on that printing process
Right. Yeah,
rather than a dot, like bin-day process.
and you can do gray tones on top of black uh, solid line art. You just have to set it up differently, and you have to print it differently. Neither of which apparently is a priority of some people.
No,
Um,
and they're not doing that
yeah,
on
no,
Walking Dead. It's just a
no,
digital file that's getting
right.
the line art's being printed at the same time as the grays.
So, um, so yeah, that's a thing I can do a demo video for sometime, is how to separate out the grayscale portion and a line art portion of an image, and supply it to the printer in such a way that only the grayscales are half toned and the other part of the image is not half toned. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that would
so
be awesome.
this is the area where I was talking about the how inappropriate it would be if you just had the contour lines of the rock. Look at what I've done to the head of this guy. It just looks totally heinous.
Oh yeah, I have that same thing.
Right,
It's like this blob that looks like it's connected to the side of his head.
right, exactly. Because line weight is a very useful, you know, yeah, yada yada yada. Lines don't exist in real life. Blah blah blah. The fact is, we read lines in real life, even if we're not, you know, actually, if they don't actually appear. And one of the strongest ways you can make a statement with contour lines is by the weight. And when you have very very thick contour lines in the background, and they're not leavened by some kind of texture or value, you can really get into trouble because it can dominate the image.
Well, it's funny you say like yada yada, yeah, lines don't exist in real life. That's something that no person who hasn't taken an art class is gonna say. Like if like this is the thing you learn as an educator, an art educator.
Right.
Everyone draws with line
Yeah.
unless they've been drawing for a long time.
Right.
Nobody, I mean, very rare is it the instinct of somebody to draw with shading and areas of value and light and dark. Everyone instinctively goes to line. And that makes sense because when you're from an evolutionary standpoint, when you're navigating the world, it does not make any sense to navigate the world as patches of value, shapes filled in with values, with gradients. That takes too much processing power to think about all of that. So you can't navigate the world. What you're doing when you're navigating the world is you're edge detecting.
Right.
And it's just, I want to get past that edge. That edge represents something that's trying to sleep with me. That's an edge I want to sleep with. I mean, that's why like lines are so sexy. Like to
Right.
me, when someone says sexy, they say a sexy car. They're talking about a car that has good contours. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice edges, nice lines. Um, when you're thinking about like the sexy woman, it's you're
Right.
looking at a set of lines, and that's so embedded in us. I've also noticed over the years that there are certain students, and this is just my personal observation. I've got no data to back this up, but very few students are prone to working in shape first. They all work in line first because that's what we do. We're edge detectors. And that's when people are training artificial intelligence to navigate the world. they're trying to write edge detection algorithms because that's the simplest way to navigate the world. That's the least processing power. So you're getting over millions of years of evolution to consider the area. And if you look at Alfred Yarbus, do you know him, Sean?
I don't know.
He's a I don't know if he was a psychologist or whatever, but he was the first person to do eye tracking motions,
Right.
eye tracking
Yes.
studies. And what they found is that, like, when you're looking at a face, the first thing your eye does is it establishes the perimeter. It just zips around and establishes the perimeter, and then it just bounces back in these quick, jerky little motions at all of the focusing the fovea on all of the relevant details. So, like eyes, nose, mouth, and then just bounce. Once you've established where those are at, you bounce back and forth between the eye. You never once does your eye, unless it's moving from the outside to the inside, even ever touch a forehead or a chin. So you're never focusing the high resolution part of your eye. Your brain's just making that up. It learned what a forehead was when you were like 6 months old, and it's never looked at a forehead again. So we don't look at area. We look at we establish edge, and then your brain is just filling in the edge for you for the rest of it as you watch the eyes and stuff. So you just behaviorally you can see that people pay attention to edge as well. And so all my students, for the most part, draw with line. Some of them are prone to shape, very few. And then when someone has most people can pick up shape. So like when you do like a negative space assignment or something like that, they can pick it up pretty well. The ones who absolutely hate it and struggle with it, I've noticed are almost always athletes.
Hmm.
Like if
Interesting.
someone cannot deal with shape, not all the time, but like, and not every athlete, but the percentage is huge. And I thought, why is that? Well, an athlete more than anyone is training themselves for edges.
Right.
And once you tell them that, they're like, oh, and it's just this huge, it was a huge revelation to me, like after so many semesters of teaching, that athletes, especially the guys who play football, they're so concerned, like a running back, so concerned about that, like eighth of an inch difference between the edges that allows him to roll around the guy that's trying to murder him.
Right.
It's really powerful stuff, and really fascinating, neurological.
Well, my little defensive line uh, statement would just be that that is the first mark that any kid will make if you give them a tool. Kids love making lines. Kids love fake writing, uh,
Mm,
as in making essentially like symbol shapes that to them represent the same kind of writing that you're doing when they see you writing.
yeah, that makes sense.
Um, and I have all types of memories of being pre-writing age and making marks uh, that were intended to represent writing or pictures of different types, and
Mm, I don't remember that.
including being on the playground. And I was kindergarten, and closing my eyes and writing in the dirt with a big stick, and looking at the pictures that were there when I had my eyes closed, and
Mm.
divining the future of the classmates that were nearby.
I've been trying that lately. We talk a lot about guys who are amazing pre-visualizers, and
Right.
me and you talked the very first time I met Sean, I took the My Strange Death of Alex Raymond art down to San Diego to have him scan it, which was silly because we later found out that my scanner worked just fine. Uh, but it was really nice to get to meet Sean, and we talked a lot about pre-visualization and how
Mhm.
I'm very bad at it. And you gave me some things to try, like visualizing something and rotating it, I think was one of
Right.
your
Yeah.
things. Then I have a number of students who tell me that they have ideas in their head. They can pre-visualize, but they can't get them out.
Hmm.
And so what I've been trying and what I've been telling my students to try is I do a lot of hand-eye coordination training with my
Okay.
students. And so I've been trying it and I've been having them try it. Close your eyes and look at the image in your head and use your mental eye to like move around the thing and then coordinate your hand to that, like
Right.
with your eyes closed, do a blind drawing of whatever's in your head. And I've been trying that, and man, it works really, like, I'm surprised that the result, it's almost better than if I try and sketch the thing I'm thinking about
Right.
with my eyes open, or at least equivalent, which is really surprising. I don't know how we got there. Oh, you're talking about kids and drawing with your eyes closed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you were doing that as a child.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I just remember the sort of social aspect of it, and all the kids gathered around, watching
Mm.
this, like, you know, watching the marks being made in the sand or whatever. I think that's the power of line, is that it's the first thing for us. It's the primal one.
Well, and I
Um,
think it is because we're edge detectors.
right,
So that's of course the first thing you go to. Like, um, when you watch kids draw, this is something else I've speculated, and this is why I focus so much on hand-eye coordination with my students in the beginning. Is before you learn the linguistic stuff, really all you have is, you don't know what a duck is yet,
right,
but you, you're experiencing looking at a duck, which means you're kind of recording the experience of your eye moving across it. But you don't have the mental, your brain hasn't learned enough yet to like create the persistent image of a duck. You're just getting like this piecemeal experience of whatever, wherever your phobia is focused at, because you don't have a duck for your brain to resolve it in. So I think very young kids, when they draw, I think what they're doing, A, I think it's just fun to make lines. But
right,
B, I do think maybe they're drawing the path of their looking.
right,
Like when they just scribble around and you're like, what is that, honey? And they say it's a duck.
right,
That was the path of either them looking at the duck, and that's the path that their eyes took, what's called the saccadic motions of their eyes. Or, yeah, they have a mental kind of experience of a duck,
right.
but it and you'll see it go away as soon as you teach kids language,
Yes.
or as soon as that one asshole teacher comes in and the kid makes like crazy saccadic motion hand-eye coordination drawings, and the teacher doesn't know what it is, and so they're like, no honey, this is a bird, and they draw a
Yeah.
McDonald's in.
And that's
Yeah.
what they're stuck with for the next 15 years.
Yeah, and they immediately go into icon and language,
Right.
and they're no longer drawing the path of their eyes across something. So I spent so much time at the beginning of my classes trying to sync students' hands back up to the path of looking, and forget about the object. Just look at it and
So,
draw where your hand goes.
speaking of path here, I've been having fun sort of trying to decode the stippling here, and there are some obvious areas where the it's essentially like lines in the whiter parts of the rock, where they're essentially like lines created with the dots, and so I'm sort of following those to sort of see like how much did they feel out of that. But you can see how much work I did without actually stippling on the rock. I really just didn't want to do it until I had to.
Yeah, I tried to hold back on my brush marks because of that. Like what I was tempted to do as a line looked like it was probably created with stippling.
Right.
So I intentionally held back. It was tempting, and I did some of it where like a line like this or like this was probably just done with stippling. Same with the blacks. I really think a lot more of the black was done with stippling than you might want to comfortably, like you might be comfortable imagining some crazy person spending the time on. Um,
Notice how they're using thickness of the dot as well as the density of dot. Um,
yeah, which is beautiful.
mm-hmm.
And that's another reason I'm thinking tech pin, because I can just switch between two. I can just switch between the two.
Right. And maybe, yeah. I'm having luck just sort of pressing down my pen at an angle that is creating a. It's not perfectly round,
That's
but
the other reason my inclination is to go away from the dip pin, because the dip pins don't really get you dots so much. I mean, maybe it's just the ones I use.
Yeah, this one, since it's rounded, like we were talking about, I get. I mean, I get a pretty clear dot, although it has a slightly like chicken scratch, you know, chicken headed, like slightly triangular look to some
Yeah.
of them. But a lot of that is just the angle that I'm holding it at. So like when I'm holding it at a like closer to flat to the page than you would do when you're drawing.
Yeah, you're doing it like that.
Right,
I
exactly.
actually wonder, I think that maybe a lot of the problems I have with the 102 being scratchy and stuff is because I should be holding it flatter to the page.
Right.
And I tend to hold it pretty up and down. So I think that's actually like, I don't know, in that book you have,
Uh-huh.
the instructional book, does he talk about the
He
proper angle of the pen
he
for?
does, but you know, he doesn't get into he's using like a slightly rounded tip, and he assumes that you are too. But yeah, he talks about the angle some, and definitely varying the angle with the tool can help. But yeah, the 102 you can, you know, really rip up a piece of paper.
Yeah,
Just
but I think if you angle it down, then that's not as,
yep.
like, if you angle it more flat, that's not as much of a problem. Also, going back over, like I always have a hard time once I put down one direction of hatching, when I go back over it, it's hard to get really clean lines as you go over those old ink lines. And I wonder that the people that get that really, like Scott Williams, who gets obviously using a 102, goes over it without any scratching.
Right.
I wonder if he holds. I'll try some of that right here. So I
Yeah.
already have like two directions. Maybe if I held the pen flatter, it would be, yeah, that is cleaner.
Interesting. So that could be a source of some of that for you.
Yeah, it's more buttery
So now
to hold the pen flatter.
I'm starting to treat this a little bit more like my image in the sense of trying to evaluate the values that I've got going on right here and see what areas need to be lightened up and which areas need to be darkened up. And I would assume that this is essentially how they would have proceeded with the image.
Yeah, you, you, well, I think you're really smart in doing these, um, like forming edges basically
Right.
with lines of dots. I'm I would like 100% agree with you. That had to have been done. Is basically they're like proportioning out the main edges. I think that's totally right. Then I wonder if it was like a light value over everything to then
Hmm.
break those proportions down into a shape, like instead. So this is talking about shape versus line. There's ways to proportion out an image where you're relying pretty much just on lines to get it all in. I find the older I get, and this is part of the drawing versus painting, painting is a more shape based way of looking at things. And it's actually sometimes easier to get proper proportions if you're looking at shape
Right.
than lines can be too far apart, shapes can be bigger and closer together. So for me it's easier to relate those larger things. So I wonder if they did like this big area of value at all light and then darkened it, or if they were getting the gradients as they were going, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
recreating the image, it's easier to get the gradient as you're going. Does that
Yeah.
generally
No,
make
that
sense?
makes perfect sense.
Like when I'm teaching a student to shade, I say, you know, start light and just block in the general differences in light and dark, and then start going in and, you know, set up some of the gradients as you're going, but don't worry about that too much. It's until you've trained your mind to be really good at something, you want to separate it out.
Right.
Once you get good at it, then you can start combining it with other problems, and you can juggle 4 or 5 problems at once. But until you can handle each problem effortlessly on its own, you should kind of separate it out into its own step, in my mind at least.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I wonder, I mean, I'm sure this person at this point has been doing has been doing dots for many years.
I'm getting tightness now in my hand that I didn't have before.
Oh yeah, it's like claw, right? This is the
Yep.
perfect time to get into the claw. I'm gonna hold my pen differently here.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to loosen up my grip because I don't really actually need focus, like a focus of positioning.
No, it's funny, right? That would be something in stippling where you're really not having to be terribly in control, that
No.
you tend to do that. I find that writing is the thing that hurts my hand more than anything
Mm-hmm.
else.
Well, your teacher who taught you how to write was not an ergonomic specialist, I'm sure.
No,
These
probably not.
poor
And God
kids, I
knows,
see death grips on their crayons.
God knows though, like how much I actually listened either. Like
Hmm.
I don't. I'll be honest. I probably should get on students about it, but I don't. I just everyone has their thing that they do, and I'm not coming in trying to change that too much. Maybe I should for their sake, but
Yeah, I always felt bad, like especially if somebody had a really interesting personal style coming in when we would talk about figure drawing or something. I felt weird correcting proportions on somebody who had an aesthetically pleasing personal style already.
it's really difficult, and the more I teach, the more it bothers me. I think it took me a year of teaching and formulating the way I talk about art to realize that in like a basic drawing class at a college, you spend so much time breaking them of what I call cartoon brain, the iconic
Right.
thinking,
Mm-hmm.
which is when they start transitioning, like 3 or 4. Their drawings start at age 3 or 4, and they get showed the stick figures and all of that, and their drawing becomes linguistic. It becomes iconic.
Right.
The
If I covered
standard,
objects that fit on this space, like I need the eyes. Oh, the eyes are this color. Oh, I need eyelashes. Oh, the eyelashes go this direction.
yeah, it's all emojis basically,
Yeah.
or icons on your phone, and it basically, quote unquote, beginner drawing is a vision. It's like you wrote your grocery list, but you did it with icons on your phone,
Right.
and they don't really worry about placement or perspective or any of that. So the typical basic drawing class, the agenda is to break them of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that similar to what
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought about? Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
But then what if you have somebody who's visually sophisticated within their personal iconography, um, and they're coming to you with an already formed style and habits that are not only sophisticated but aesthetically pleasing?
yeah, I mean that's a whole different problem. Like I had that, and I felt like I lost my style a bit when I was taking figure drawing.
Right.
I was really mad for a while because I had a little bit more angular approach at that
Mm-hmm.
point in time. Like if Mike Mignola was drawing very realistically, maybe like, but with that
Right.
really angular approach, but yeah, more realistic proportions and stuff. I guess Duncan Figueredo is a guy I think about that kind of draws that way. I was looking a lot at Lee Bermejo, Wildstorm artist at the time too. But yeah, I struggled with that, feeling like I was losing my style. But eventually, I don't worry about that with students so much because eventually you let go of them and they'll just wrap back whatever they've learned into their
Right.
approach. The thing that I started to wonder though is we're telling them that we're teaching them to draw more realistically or see more realistically.
Right.
And after watching them for a semester, I said, you know what? What they're doing is they're drawing the world in the way that you actually interact with it on a day to day basis,
Right.
which is you have this really quick icon of what the thing is in your head. You don't really see any detail, you just use it. So I call that use value oriented perception.
Right.
It's you see the thing in just enough resolution to use it. And that's what people are drawing. They're drawing the icons that show how do you use the thing. And then what I'm asking them to do, and I still feel kind of bad about it, is like, okay, draw the world as if it's not working, as if it's broken.
Right.
And if it's broken, then you have to sit down. And this comes from the philosopher Heidegger, ready to hand versus ready at hand. Have we talked about this before?
No.
Okay. The philosopher Heidegger has these two distinctions: ready to hand and ready at hand. I don't know which one is which, but one of them is when you're absorbed in the flow of using something. And that's what I would equate to the use value perception or
Hmm.
iconic perception. And then it's only when the thing breaks that you stop using it and you look at, so it's probably ready to hand is using it and ready at hand is it's broken, and you're just staring at the details. And I realized, like, oh my god, realistic artists are just these crazy people who are going around looking at the world as if it's broken
Right.
and looking at all the details. So I feel bad, like, I kind of feel bad teaching people to look at the world as if it's broken.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's an excellent description of the mental process of essentially draining something of its cultural and utilitarian and social values and only seeing it as a series of impressions on your retina.
Yeah, like just shapes and colors on a flat screen.
I mean, it's a schizophrenic, you're essentially asking someone to have a more schizophrenic, dissociative worldview.
Well, it's funny too, because like many times my brother really likes taking psilocybin mushrooms,
Hmm.
and he loves going out in nature and taking the shrooms, and he describes the experience to me, and a lot of it I'm like, dude, that's just like how I see the world all
Yeah.
the
Right.
time. Like, oh man, you like really start to notice the space, but like the sky comes forward and you're noticing the space between the leaves and the trees. I said, that's just negative
Mm,
space, man.
yeah.
Like, and I've seen articles to that effect that when they compare brain scans of a artist and someone who's on psilocybin, well, when you look at the brain scan of someone who's taken psilocybin, the closest that you'll get is an artist engaged in
Hmm.
the practice of drawing. It's not the same, but that's the
Right.
closest you can find in someone who's not taken a substance.
Yeah. No. Look up dissociative schizophrenia, dissociative state, and it is a very interesting. You know. Yes. I think that it's worth remembering that anytime a drug works on somebody or a mental state is achieved through mental illness, that those pathways are there ready to be activated by another skill inside of the brain at all times.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're there. They're part of us. So this,
in other words, the reason a drug works is because there are receptors for that drug. Um, the reason that a mental state is achieved is because that mental state is there to be achieved. The
yeah,
pathways are there.
those pathways, those connections are already there.
Right.
Um,
How's your oh, so you haven't really tackled any of the stippling yet.
I got all the stippling down in the rock. I mean, you're just faster than me.
Well, in this case, I'm aided by the scale, so I'm working smaller than you.
I'm getting the stippling. I'm approaching it more like finishing each area. I
Okay.
kind of have a feeling that's. I think you did the right thing. Like they just generally lined it out first, but I think
Right.
once they got going, I think they pretty much finished an area rather than doing these passes of darkening.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah,
think,
I think that was just mentally how I would approach it personally, and I jump around in an image because I'm trying to gradually shift the value spectrum, and part of that is just my lack of imagination. Um, it enables me to respond to the image and process more effectively.
well, that's why I wonder because if you were paying attention to the overall value of the image, more, it would be, I'll do some of it. It would be wise of the artist to put in just a coat of lighter value
Right.
and then start making decisions about, okay, this area needs to get darker. So the way that I'm approaching it, and it looks like the way you're approaching it, where you're kind of finishing each little bit as you go in terms of the gradients, um, is not the best for that decision making
Right.
process, right? So I'm
Well,
trying to hang back a little bit, but the problem of all these recreations is someone has made all these decisions for us.
right.
And so you're not getting the full decision making process of an artist. Like we're trying to retroactively speculate about what that process might have been, but it's really hard to recreate it.
Well, I sort of I guess my tendency here has been to work on the dark areas of it first, and then sort of do mid-tone,
Mm,
especially coming out of the dark areas. So if you look, like a lot of the what gives the impression that the entire thing is stippled, even if there's black, is the edges of the black are softened by the mid-tone stippling.
yeah.
So I'm sort of building out from the black areas. Also, I was amazed by how well the dry brush has been incorporated and absorbed into the areas of stippling I've done so far. I think that that's probably part of the process here.
Oh yeah, that's always a good effect because you can basically, the dry brush creates like a gradient a little bit for you, but then you can
Right,
hide the fact that you even did a dry brush in all
right.
of the texture. Yeah, that's very possible. It's funny that we always go opposite. Like I am such a l- like the black is the last decision I make, and you kind of make that decision first. That's
Yeah.
pretty consistent in all of our videos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so my tendency in the rocks would be to lightly stipple everything and get all of the major differentiation between, okay, light and dark done lightly.
Right.
So I see the shapes, the placement of the shapes, and then darken as needed. It's
I'm
kind of
always
funny.
I'm always thinking about it from an efficiency standpoint, um, because I have no time.
Yeah. Well, I'm a dumbass too, so I mean, I'm the idiot who drew the same picture like 16 times instead of just statting it. Um,
It gives it its own kind of power. That was an interesting, yeah. Well, people will see that when they have the book in their hands.
yeah, when you get Strange Death of Alex Raymond, in the interstitial chapters with Jack, if an image was used more than once, instead of just photocopying or photoshopping that, doing it once and photoshopping it everywhere, I actually hand drew each one of them. The later stuff in the book where there was multiples of the same image, by that point I
Right.
was I had proved my point to Dave about my work ethic, I think is part of what I was doing. And I got less interested in them as I got back into the comic book production mindset and out of the fine art mindset of like this is going to hang on a wall one day.
Right.
But now those pieces are like those early ones are more saleable, you know. Like the other ones, it's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of scattered random crap, you know. I mean, we're collaging it
Right.
together, so it's harder to sell it on the original art market when it's just a page full of gobbledygook.
Right. Man, I
So
really like this image more now that I've drawn it. I mean, I
that's the
really
case
liked it.
with all of them, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Um, I mean, I've really enjoyed every image that we've looked at, but this is one where I thought going in I really liked it, and now I really like it.
Yeah, it's really impressive. It's you realize like how much effort and thought and work and how clever, sophisticated it is, right?
Right.
Like with all the textural stuff that we're talking about, when you start doing it, you see it even more. Do you think you'll like, okay, this is now, like you were talking about wanting to move towards this coloring in black and white in your own work. Are you
Well, well,
stealing techniques from this now?
I don't know if this is reachable for me at my current. Um, I have done heavily textured stuff in the past, and I don't know from a time perspective if it's going to be possible for me to come back to something like this. Um, but yeah, I mean the stippling thing. I mean, I don't think I've stippled since I doing like a technique demonstration in high school or something. When I was teaching high
Yeah.
school, that is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this is a very interesting. This is a very interesting image. I I don't know how much. I mean, I try to imagine how many copies would you have to sell of a comic that looked like this in the United States in order
Oh,
to
to make it
continue to
worth
do
your
it.
time.
Yeah. Um, and maybe that sounds like an unromantic view.
Yeah, but
But
you have to think about that more because
I do.
you work freelance, right?
Yeah. So literally everything that I do is worth a certain amount of time. Um, and until both my kids are in person school, 100% of the time, I have a limited work schedule. Um, you know, I have limited anything that I do is in lieu of paid work that I've
Or being dad.
right exactly.
Yeah.
And so um, I'm in the currently I guess I can say go ahead and say this. Currently in the planning stages of a comic um, that I'm very much hoping will be published by Living the Line in late spring or early summer of next year.
Well, at least you know that the publisher has accepted the project.
It's true. The publisher has accepted the project, and the publisher is currently running the numbers um, with various printers to see how feasible it is. But it's weird. That is really the first thing that popped into my head is how many copies would I have to sell to make this style economically feasible?
Mm.
And art, unless you're a rich kid who's taken care of, art is an economic has an economic consideration or an economic component to it. Um, Especially if you're on your own, you're doing all
And
this.
providing, like, as soon as you have a family, like
Right,
up until this last year, I didn't have to worry about anyone else but me. I mean,
right,
now this week and for 5 or 6 more weeks, I'm balancing that out too, where I'm playing like kind of dad to a
right.
kid for the first time. Like
Hmm.
right now, mom's at work and I'm locked in here, and kid's having to keep himself busy, and I'm hoping he's not eating his lunch too early. Yeah, all of that stuff, and it's been, yeah, it's like, oh, hey baby, can you help him with his math problems? It's like, oh man, I got to do this, and I got to do actual stuff for my actual job, and uh, it is a massive time suck doing this kind of stuff. I'm lucky enough, and this is why I went into teaching in the first place, is once I realized that to make the kind of comics I wanted to make, I wouldn't make money at it.
Right.
Like I didn't want to make the superhero stuff anymore. That's what I wanted to do when I was growing up. But when I hit my early 20s, I wanted to get experimental, and I realized there's no money in this, and
Yeah.
um, I will die inside if I have to, like, not sell out, but
Yeah.
if I have to do superhero stuff, I just can't make myself do it. So I
That's
got to find another way to make money, and that teaching was the solution. So I'm very lucky that, like, Strange Death, we sat on that for 5 years or something,
yeah, a
right?
long time.
Like a couple years after I finished it before Dave kind of ceded the rights to us to publish it. But I was never worried about the finances of it. It was just like I wanted the book to come out.
Right.
And had we kept working on it, I had the leisure of, like, okay, I'll do this over the summers,
Right.
and I can go as crazy as I want on the details and be as slow as I want. Um, so that was a very intentional on my part that I took the economic component out of my art. but that also means I have less time. So like if I wanted to follow up Strange Death, like when,
Right.
when
Yeah.
am I finding the time to do any of that work? It's very difficult. And, especially doing this now, this is a couple hours a week at least. And uh, I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
I think it will be. It's fun. I'm enjoying it. I think it will grow. I think eventually we can monetize this somehow. But I mean, it's a risk on both of our parts too. That if it doesn't grow, then it's just kind of
Right.
you know
Well, the experience.
100 and some odd hours we lost.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the process of doing it, and I'm hoping that that is its own, you know, reward. But it's definitely like, you know, when I just think about this over the course of a book, I imagine a lot of. It's difficult for me to imagine at this point, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So you're not sitting here going, "Oh, I'm going to steal this technique," because you're like,
No,
"Well, that's not practical."
no, certainly not. Uh, I am appreciating though the sort of vibrancy it has when I'm actually looking at it in person and sort of developing. I'm getting out of the. I'm getting more into the sort of freedom to develop the. Right now, I'm looking at the texture marks that I made earlier, and some of the ones that were a little bit more um, angular and a little bit less dotty. I'm sort of softening them up with some dots and
Yeah, and
some
I
of the.
wonder how much of there that is in there. I'm pretty sure on their end it's all dots. Like I've been tempted in a couple spots to do more like a this type of curved line,
Mm-hmm.
but I really don't think that's how they approached it.
No, I'm keeping all the marks very short and very small, but just a few of them have a little bit more of a sort of edge to them, and I'm just softening it up. And also the transition areas, so areas where I switch from one type of mark or one type of density to the other, don't quite look as good, and so I'm softening up those areas as I've.
Mm. Another thing that I don't think we've talked about it before, but it's a little bit harder for us, and it's something that I go back and forth on if I should keep using this blue line process because having the blue line there does alter your perception of the values. It makes
It
everything
does.
look a little bit darker than it is, which is
Yep.
another reason I think my lines tend to wind up smaller. Is I'm like, that looks pretty dark.
Right.
Um, in Stranger with Alex Raymond, I was just tracing everything so it'd be a really, really thin blue line, and the blue line didn't play much havoc with my perception of values. On these ones, the full image is there, and I'm finding that something that I have to kind of calculate out for, which is
Mm-hmm.
weird. It's a weird
I,
calculation.
I'm looking at it from the side, and that seems to help a little bit. If I sort of
Mm.
lean to the side, then the blue is sublimated a little bit, just because of the particular lighting situation that I have in my room right now.
Yeah, so it's a oh, you know what we should do? We should get like a light that just cuts out the blue. Just flick that on.
Yeah, get a blue filter or a blue filter.
Boom. Yeah. Later, bitch. Now I can see my lines. Uh yeah, that would be I don't know. It's we're really going about this in a very odd way. I mean, it's an odd project anyways to be like, okay, we're going to sit around and recreate all these artists. It's
Oh, you
not
learn.
like the most indicative of how comic artists work.
Right.
Um so people watching,
Well,
we're doing this is I look at this more like archaeology of
right.
a page.
Right. The thing is, it's like you were saying when you're at the beginning stages of something, sometimes separating it out could be useful. I think when you're doing something at a high level, separating something out can also be useful in the sense that you focusing fairly minutely on the actual physical technique. I don't know, enables me to copy the physical technique better. I just would never make strokes like this intentionally.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're doing is we're like one thing that I think we're gonna start doing that we've talked about is Formalist Friday or
Yeah,
Friday formalisms. Um, because we're what we're doing right now is very surface level. So it's not looking at the artists. I mean, we talk about like with the Suge, we talked about the how you were finding the composition in the abstract by placing the black
right,
and stuff, but we're not really learning much about their storytelling. We're not
right,
learning anything about their storytelling. We're not learning much about the deeper stuff. And I always love Scott McCloud has that breakdown at the in understanding comics about how everyone starts for the most part with the surface level and then drills their way down into the formal stuff and
right.
the content and all of that. And I do feel a bit guilty on this channel that by its nature, it's so focused on surface level. And I'd hate to think, I'd hate for people to think that that's our entire view of comics is this super technical, superficial stuff.
No, it's just one lens that we're happen to have polished up recently, and are taking a look at things with. But yeah, I'd be very much interested in looking at some formal issues and recomposing a page or decomposing a page or figuring out why something works or doesn't work or.
Yeah, and then composition, like that's
Mm-hmm.
a another thing that is something I mean when we're doing the book flip throughs we kind of talk about that stuff, but we can't break it down in this type of detail because we're focused more on the production issues of the book level stuff, story. um, so yeah, I think it will be interesting to see as we go, okay, how do we approach assessing those other levels, like
Right.
you've seen the Batman WTF that I did that was
Mm-hmm.
a parody of Grant Morrison's Batman run, and each page is drawn in the style of a different artist. So some of that was looking at this type of stuff, but I was also very, very much looking at how does this artist compose a page? Like, do they tend to have like Jim Lee is more likely to stack panels and have a little panel over here and a big one, and like other artists are more likely to have a like the grid, Watchmen type of grid. There's certain things that they do. J.H. Williams the third kind of always has these wild double page spread compositions. So that's definitely when you're learning to mimic an artist. There's a lot more to it than just the what pens did they use and what
Mm-hmm.
order did they do it in. It'll be interesting to see what techniques we can come up with for that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm looking pretty satisfied, or I'm feeling pretty satisfied with mine here.
Yeah, you're going crazy over there. I'm always way behind you. That's fine. We can have half finished images for me. I mean, at this point, it's just I get it. It's a lot more stippling,
Yeah.
right? Like, there's not much more to learn. It's
Should should
just like,
we uh, should we wrap it here in a minute?
yeah, we'll
Um,
let you go be dad, and I can go be kind of dad.
I'm gonna go be painter who has to mail the painting that he finished the other day. I didn't have a
Oh, okay.
mailing tube big enough um,
So many different roles.
for that giant. Yeah, don't do it, kids. Pick one thing and do that thing.
Nah, a little variety is good too.
um,
It is a juggling act, though.
as long as it's not a juggalo act.
No, I don't think. I
Man.
mean, maybe it would get more views if we did our reviews in clown makeup.
Yeah,
We could
I'm up
tag him
for it.
Juggalo.
I'm up for it. Yeah, man, it's interesting. So we were talking about this image, just looking at it, about the contrast between those foreground figures and the labor-intensive, background stuff. And it's funny, it just feels that way. My goodness, I just felt so loose and light when I was putting in the lines for the figures, and now my hands all tight and cramped up.
Yeah, it's finicky. You're drawing versus painting, being calligraphic, and yeah, those are much more fun, I think, to do, right? Feels good, fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I got to get more of that in my own art. But I
Yeah.
will say, looking at all the manga that we're looking at, if I do another book, I want to bring, okay, like take what we did on Strange Death of Alex Raymond, bring all of the American photo comic strip photorealist techniques, but then add this textural component.
Mm-hmm.
They have a little bit of that, but the manga artists are so much more developed
Right.
with the textural stuff. I would really love to see a book. Like I feel like that will push the realism game in pen and ink art to the next level. In
Yeah.
comics, is taking the everything I've learned from Stan Drake and Alex Raymond and those guys, and then everything I'm learning from. And I actually, when we were making those books, I had to keep certain mangaka that I was looking at out of it. I mean, some of it
Right.
snuck in there anyways, but like on You Don't Know Jack, there was definitely some stuff going on in the eyes that in the way I rendered the eyes that I was stealing from Sakamoto Shinichi. And
Right.
I had to keep it out of there for the most part. But man, I would love to really combine that because I feel like there's some other thing that hasn't been seen yet that's just totally wild. But I also wonder, like, this probably is the smarter approach. If the characters were realistic too, it could be a bit of an overload, maybe.
Yeah, I wonder. That would be an interesting, thing to tackle at some point. Is sort of seeing what the how the emphasis shifts, um, with the different levels of realism or
In
different
the figure.
approaches to realism in the figure as well. Yeah.
Or like, do you have to do more cartoony backgrounds? Which I think is part of the solution of the American guys. The backgrounds are a little bit more
Right.
simplified. Um, so I'm really curious about, all right, manga level backgrounds and use of tone and texture combined with the more American or European level of rendering. I don't know. Maybe it's just too boring. Maybe that's why you don't see much of it. But I
um,
feel like guys like Raymond, cartoon enough, their characters, especially Stan Drake, their characters are alive enough in their realism that if
mhm.
I could capture that, it's a contrast thing too, just being careful about the blacks and the whites and the grays being contrasty enough. So I don't know. I think there's a solution. Hopefully I'll get to it one day. Anyways, you ready to be
Yeah.
I'm ready to be done with stippling for sure.
Great. Well, it looks great, man. I'm looking forward to seeing the side by side comparison. And
Yeah, we'll do
yeah,
a side by side of just like this. I'll finish to here after we get off camera and we can do a
sounds
side
great.
by side. All
And
right.
then you guys can vote in the comments, okay?
Yeah, who did it better? Han, Carson, or Studio?
Mizuki Pro.
Yeah, Mizuki Pro. All right, thanks for watching everyone.
Yeah.
Take it
Take
easy.
care, guys.